Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in Ozark history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching from and the exact time when you are listening to this narration. We are interested in knowing what places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the spring of 1890, three brothers, Samuel, Thaddeus, and Jeremiah Blackwood, established a homestead in a remote hollow of the Missouri Ozarks known locally as Crow's Nest. The narrow valley, hemmed in by limestone bluffs and dense oak forest, was considered inhospitable by locals due to its limited sunlight and difficult access. County records show the brothers purchased 80 acres for a surprisingly small sum from a widow eager to leave the region after her husband's mysterious death. The deed of sale, preserved in the Shannon County Courthouse archives, notes payment made in gold coins, an unusual currency for the cash-poor region where barter was more common than specie. According to statements collected years later, the local postmaster recalled the day the brothers first arrived in the nearest town of Eminence, riding in a wagon laden with wooden trunks bound in iron straps. They spoke little, purchased supplies sufficient for establishing a homestead, and disappeared into the hills before sunset. What drew these men to a place locals avoided is the first of many questions surrounding this case. The hollow had a reputation that predated the Blackwood brothers. Hunting parties avoided it, claiming game shunned the area. Children were warned against venturing into its shadows, where sunlight penetrated for only a few hours each day between the high limestone bluffs. Local folklore from the period, collected by WPA writers in the 1932, referenced Crow's Nest Hollow as a place where the veil grows thin, though what separated our world from another was never specified in these accounts. Within weeks of their arrival, the brothers had cleared sufficient land to begin construction of their cabin. Unlike typical Ozark homesteads built near springs or streams, they chose the deepest part of the hollow, where shadows lingered longest and the silence was said to press against the ears like cotton wool. None who observed their arrival could have predicted that within a year, the brothers would vanish as mysteriously as they had appeared, leaving behind only whispers and a cabin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The Blackwood brothers arrived in Shannon County with little explanation of their past. According to documents recovered from the county courthouse archives in 1967, they claimed to be from eastern Tennessee, though inquiries made decades later found no record of the family name in the region they specified. Samuel, the eldest at 34, was described by the few who interacted with them as a man of few words with calculating eyes. Thaddeus, 30, was remembered for his unusual knowledge of plants and animal behavior. Jeremiah, 27, was rarely seen in town, though those who encountered him noted his nervous disposition and tendency to mutter to himself. The county register recorded their occupations as naturalists and collectors, though what they collected was never specified. In the decades following their disappearance, researchers traced a possible path of their movements prior to arriving in the Ozarks. Court records from Greene County, Tennessee, mention three brothers with similar descriptions charged with trespassing in 1887, though they used the surname Blackwell rather than Blackwood. A small newspaper in Kentucky reported three brothers matching their description were briefly employed at a slaughterhouse in 1888 before being dismissed for unsavory practices that the article declined to detail. Most tellingly, records from the Arkansas State Hospital for Nervous Diseases referenced a patient named Jeremiah Blackwood, committed briefly in early 1889 for episodes of catalepsy and speaking in voices not his own. He was released into the care of his brothers after just 3 weeks of treatment. The attending physician noted that the patient demonstrated an alarming fascination with the internal structures of small animals and drew anatomical illustrations of disturbing precision. The brothers' educational background remains uncertain. Samuel occasionally used Latin terminology that suggested formal schooling, while Thaddeus demonstrated extensive knowledge of botanical specimens, including rare variants not commonly documented in the region. The local schoolteacher, Miss Abigail Winters, recorded in her personal journal that Samuel once corrected her identification of a plant specimen, calling it by a scientific name she had never encountered. When pressed about his education, he reportedly smiled without warmth and replied, "My brothers and I have studied many subjects not found in common school books. Their origins before Tennessee remain shrouded in mystery, with no birth records or family connections ever established, despite extensive searches conducted by both authorities and historians in subsequent decades." The Blackwood property sat at the narrowest point of Crow's Nest Hollow, where a small creek fed by underground springs provided year-round water. The brothers constructed an unusual two-story cabin with small, high-set windows and multiple reinforced doors. By autumn 1890, they had added several outbuildings and a stone root cellar dug deep into the hillside. Elijah Thompson, whose family owned neighboring land, later recalled, "Those men worked like creatures possessed, from first light till well after dark, built everything solid, like they was preparing for a siege. Most peculiar was how they'd stop sometimes, all at once, and listen to the woods, like they heard something no one else could." The cabin itself deviated significantly from traditional Ozark construction methods. Rather than the typical rectangular structure with centered door and symmetrical windows, the Blackwood cabin featured an irregular floor plan with corners that didn't meet at right angles. The few visitors who ever entered described an interior layout that seemed deliberately confusing, with narrow hallways that turned at odd angles and staircases that led to half floors between levels. Most notable was the brothers' insistence on multiple exits, with a total of 5 reinforced doors positioned around the structure, each fitted with unusual locking mechanisms crafted by Samuel, who demonstrated unexpected skill as a metalworker. The windows, placed high on the walls, were smaller than typical and fitted with shutters that could be secured from inside. Most peculiar was the absence of glass, replaced instead by a translucent material that Thompson described as like looking through stretched animal bladder, but thicker somehow. The outbuildings included a smokehouse with an unusually large chimney, a windowless workshop where sounds of metalworking could be heard at all hours, and a third structure that remained perpetually locked. Local hunter William Crawford, who occasionally traded game with the brothers, noted that the property featured none of the typical signs of agricultural activity common to Ozark homesteads. No chicken coops, no pig pen, no cleared fields for planting, he stated in testimony given after the brothers' disappearance. Yet they never seemed to want for meat or provisions. The most substantial construction beyond the cabin itself was the root cellar, dug not horizontally into the hillside as was customary, but vertically downward, with a heavy trapdoor concealing a stone staircase that descended farther than made sense. According to Crawford, who glimpsed it only once when Thaddeus retrieved preserved foods. By winter 1890, the brothers had established a pattern of self-sufficiency that bordered on isolation. They raised no crops beyond a small kitchen garden, but seemed well supplied with meat. They made infrequent trips to the town of Eminence for supplies, always together, always departing before nightfall. Martha Collins, who operated the general store, noted in her journal discovered during a 1963 estate sale that the brothers purchased unusual quantities of salt, preserving jars, and chemical compounds she couldn't identify. When questioned, Samuel explained they preserved game for the winter months, though I never saw them with hunting rifles or typical trapping equipment. Local residents began to exchange whispered observations about the brothers' peculiar behaviors. Jeremiah was twice observed by the mill operator, standing motionless at the edge of town before dawn, staring fixedly at nothing discernible. Thaddeus developed a reputation for collecting unusual specimens from the forest, offering children pennies for bringing him certain mushrooms or insects, though he refused to explain his interest in these items. Several hunters reported finding strange arrangements of stones in the woods near the brothers' property, formations that Elias Morris, a half-Cherokee trapper, recognized as similar to markers used by his ancestors to designate boundaries between worlds. Most concerning were the reports of missing animals. 3 farmers within 5 miles of Crow's Nest Hollow reported disappearances of livestock during autumn months, with one discovering the partial remains of a prized sow at the edge of his property, butchered with what Dr. Holloway later described as surgical precision inconsistent with animal predation. The postmaster, Joshua Reynolds, recalled in a statement given in May 1891 that mail addressed to the brothers often included packages from medical supply companies in St. Louis and Chicago. Once, a package broke open, revealing glass vials and instruments I recognized from my time as a medical orderly during the war, Reynolds stated. When I mentioned it to Samuel, his manner turned cold. He claimed they were for scientific specimens, but something in his eyes made me afraid to question further. By December, even the most charitable interpretations of the brothers' behavior had given way to suspicion. Families warned children to avoid the hollow. Hunters adjusted their routes to circumvent the Blackwood property. The local minister noted increased attendance at Sunday services, where parishioners prayed not only for salvation but for protection. The winter of 1890-91 brought heavy snowfall to the Ozarks. According to weather records kept by the Eminence Postmaster, nearly 3 feet accumulated between December and February, isolating many homesteads for weeks at a time. No one saw the Blackwood brothers during this period, which was not unusual for remote residents. What later raised questions was the smoke that continuously rose from their chimney despite the bitter cold that would have typically required conservation of firewood. Several travelers passing near the hollow reported hearing strange sounds, like metal striking metal, echoing through the valley at odd hours of the night. Thomas Ledbetter, who transported mail between Eminence and the neighboring county during these months, provided testimony in May 1891 describing other unsettling observations. The creek near their property should have frozen solid given the temperatures we endured, yet remained flowing even in deepest February, he stated. The water ran dark, nearly black at times, and carried an odor that caused my horse to refuse drinking from it. Most disturbing were the lights observed in the woods surrounding the cabin. Unlike the steady glow of lanterns or firelight, witnesses described brief, intense flashes of blue-green illumination that seemed to move among the trees. Tobias Miller, returning late from a family visit in January, reported seeing 3 identical figures standing in a perfect triangle formation on the path to the hollow, though when he approached, they retreated into the woods in perfect synchronicity, moving like they shared a single mind. Another unusual account came from 12-year-old Sarah Jenkins, who became lost in the woods during a brief thaw in late January. Found 2 days later suffering from exposure, she spoke of finding shelter in a warm place under the ground where 3 men with the same face fed her a meat stew that tasted wrong and spoke together in a language she couldn't understand. Her parents attributed the story to feverish hallucinations, though the direction from which search parties recovered her placed her within a half-mile of the Blackwood property. The county doctor, examining her upon her return, noted unusual marks on her inner arms, consistent with careful bloodletting or sample collection that the child had no memory of receiving. Throughout these winter months, livestock continued to disappear from surrounding farms, with only partial remains discovered, often stripped of specific organs. On the 17th of April 1891, tax collector William Hargrove rode to the Blackwood property to collect their first annual payment. His official report, filed the following day and preserved in county records, described finding the cabin apparently abandoned. The doors stood unlocked, a half-prepared meal lay on the table, and 3 cups of coffee had congealed into a thick sludge. Most disturbing was the complete absence of personal belongings, no clothing, no tools, no evidence of the brothers themselves. Yet the cabin showed no signs of struggle or hasty departure. It was as if they simply disappeared during their breakfast. Hargrove wrote, "Something about the stillness of that place set my horse to nervous stamping and caused the hair on my neck to rise." Hargrove's report, remarkably detailed for a tax official, noted several peculiarities about the abandoned homestead. The fireplace contained hot coals despite no one being present, suggesting the brothers had vanished mere hours before his arrival. 3 chairs were positioned around the table, each pulled back at identical angles, as though the occupants had risen in unison. The meal itself consisted of an unidentifiable meat stew that Hargrove described as having an unusual odor that reminded me of the medicinal compounds used during the war. Most troubling was Hargrove's description of the cabin's atmosphere, which he struggled to articulate in official language. The air inside felt wrong, heavy in a way that made breathing difficult. Though the day was bright, shadows gathered in corners where they had no natural right to be. Sounds seemed muffled, as if the walls absorbed them. Before departing, Hargrove observed what appeared to be fresh footprints leading from the cabin toward the root cellar. Upon investigation, he found the cellar's heavy door secured with a complex lock he couldn't open. As I knelt examining the mechanism, I distinctly heard movement from within, a slow scraping like something being dragged across stone. When I called out, the sound ceased immediately, replaced by what I can only describe as breathing, though deeper and more rhythmic than any human respiration. Hargrove concluded his report by acknowledging his decision to leave without further investigation. Citing his responsibility to complete his tax collection route, he recommended authorities examine the property at earliest convenience with appropriate manpower. Sheriff James Rutledge assembled a search party on the 19th of April, 1891. 6 men, including Elijah Thompson and the county doctor, spent a full day examining the property and surrounding woods. The official report, recovered during a courthouse renovation in 1952, documented several troubling discoveries. The root cellar, locked with an elaborate mechanism, contained preserved meats of unidentifiable origin. Strange symbols had been carved into the support beams throughout the cabin. Most concerning, according to Dr. Wilson's addendum to the report, was a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards containing personal effects, watches, rings, wallets, that appeared to belong to at least 12 different individuals, none of them the Blackwood brothers. Dr. Wilson noted that the preserved meats in the cellar exhibited textures and anatomical structures inconsistent with local game animals, though he stopped short of specifying his suspicions in the official document. His personal journal, discovered among his effects after his death in 1907, was more explicit. The specimens found in the Blackwood cellar bore disturbing resemblance to human organ tissue, particularly what appeared to be sections of liver, heart, and brain matter, preserved through some method I cannot identify. The search party discovered a workshop behind the main cabin containing tools of unusual design, including specialized knives with curved blades, glass containers connected by copper tubing, and a leather-bound journal written in a cipher that remained unbroken for decades. Most unsettling was the discovery reported by Deputy Marshal Collins, who ventured furthest into the surrounding woods. Approximately half a mile from the cabin, in a small clearing, he found what he described as a perfect circle of ground where nothing grew, surrounding a stone platform bearing the same symbols carved in the cabin beams. The platform was stained dark brown, consistent with dried blood, and contained 3 shallow depressions in a triangular pattern, each precisely the size and shape of a man kneeling. Sheriff Rutledge concluded his report with a recommendation that arrest warrants be issued for the Blackwood brothers on suspicion of multiple counts of murder. However, the county judge, reviewing the evidence, determined that without identifiable victims or bodies, charges could not be sustained. The case was classified as an investigation into unexplained disappearances, with the brothers themselves listed among the missing. By May 1891, Sheriff Rutledge had widened his investigation, sending inquiries to neighboring counties about missing travelers or unusual incidents. Responses, collected in a leather folio discovered in 1952, revealed a disturbing pattern. At least 8 people known to have traveled through Shannon County between October 1890 and March 1891 had never reached their intended destinations. The case attracted the attention of a reporter from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, whose 3-part feature published in June 1891 brought national attention to the mystery. "What happened in that isolated hollow," he wrote in his conclusion, "may never be fully known, but whatever dark business the Blackwood brothers conducted there has left an indelible stain on this corner of the Ozarks." The missing travelers represented a cross-section of society: a livestock buyer from Kansas City, 2 peddlers of patent medicines, a surveyor working for a railroad company, a young woman traveling to visit relatives, and 3 men seeking land to purchase. Sheriff Rutledge noted in his correspondence that all had sufficient reason to pass near Crow's Nest Hollow, and none had any apparent connection to each other beyond their disappearances. The Post-Dispatch reporter, Frederick Holloway, spent 2 weeks in Shannon County, interviewing locals and examining the Blackwood property firsthand. His published account included details not mentioned in official reports, including the discovery of unusual equipment in the brothers' workshop that resembled surgical instruments, and a well behind the cabin that, when measured, proved to be over 60 feet deep, far beyond practical necessity. Most significant was Holloway's interview with a trapper who claimed to have observed the brothers carrying a large wrapped bundle into the woods late one November night. They moved in perfect unison, the trapper told Holloway, like they was connected by invisible strings. And they was humming something, all three making the exact same note, not like singing but like the sound a tuning fork makes. Following Holloway's articles, visitors from neighboring states began arriving in eminence, drawn by macabre curiosity. Local businesses initially welcomed the tourism, but enthusiasm faded when 3 sightseers who ventured to the hollow failed to return. A search party found only their abandoned wagon near the property, adding to the growing list of disappearances associated with the Blackwood name. In July 1891, heavy rainfall caused a partial collapse of the hillside behind the Blackwood cabin, revealing what Sheriff Rutledge's subsequent report described as a man-made chamber of considerable size. This carefully excavated space, reinforced with timber and stone, contained evidence that would transform understanding of the case. Inside were specialized tools of unknown purpose, journals written in a cipher that remained unbroken until 1967, and a collection of anatomical drawings that Dr. Wilson described as showing a disturbing preoccupation with the internal structure of the human body, particularly the nervous system. Most chilling was the discovery of a second hidden chamber, accessible only through a narrow tunnel, its contents so disturbing that they were omitted from official reports and described only as evidence of activities against nature and man alike. Deputy Marshal Collins, one of the first to enter the chambers, resigned his position the following day without explanation, and reportedly left the state entirely. Dr. Wilson's private correspondence, sealed by his request until after his death, revealed more specific details about the second chamber. The room contained 3 stone slabs arranged in a triangle, each bearing leather restraints and channels carved to collect fluid that drained into a central basin. The walls were covered with the same symbols found throughout the cabin, painted in a substance that chemical analysis confirms to be human blood of multiple types. Most horrifying were the preserved specimens in glass containers, showing what appeared to be human brain tissue in various stages of some unknown process, alongside organs I cannot identify as belonging to any known species. The hidden chambers contained other troubling items: clothing belonging to previously identified missing persons, a collection of skulls with precise holes drilled at identical points, and a map of the surrounding counties with locations marked by small red crosses, 23 in total. When investigators checked these locations, they found each corresponded to a site where travelers had disappeared over the previous decade. Following discovery of the chambers, county officials ordered the entire property destroyed, with all recovered materials to be burned. However, before this order could be executed, a fire of unknown origin consumed the cabin and surrounding structures, burning with such intensity that witnesses described the flames as blue-white, like metal in a forge. By autumn 1891, Sheriff Rutledge had compiled a list of 17 individuals believed to have fallen victim to the Blackwood brothers. The evidence, though circumstantial, was compelling. Personal items found in the cabin matched descriptions of belongings carried by the missing travelers. Dates of disappearances corresponded with the brothers' known presence in certain areas. Marks on bones, found scattered in the surrounding woods, matched tools discovered on the property. Joseph Miller, a stagecoach driver whose route passed within 5 miles of Crow's Nest Hollow, provided testimony in October 1891 that added another dimension to the case. Twice during November last year, he stated in a sworn affidavit, I encountered Samuel Blackwood at Henderson's Crossing around sunset. Each time he was alone and offered generous payment for passage to eminence. Each time he carried a heavy trunk that he guarded most particular. The smell coming from that trunk haunts me still. Among the missing travelers, 5 cases stood out for their connection to professions involving specialized knowledge. Dr. Frederick Hammond, a physician from St. Louis who disappeared while collecting botanical specimens. Professor Arthur Chambers from Washington University, last seen researching Ozark folklore. 2 engineers surveying for a proposed railroad. And Reverend Thomas Blackwell, known for his interest in pre-Christian religious practices. Sheriff Rutledge noted in his private journal that these individuals might have been targeted not merely as random victims, but for specific expertise they possessed. Fragments of correspondence recovered from the hidden chamber suggested the brothers had engaged in written exchanges with at least 3 of these men before their disappearances. Most disturbing was the testimony of Sarah Wilson, wife of a farmer whose property adjoined the hollow. In late October 1890, she observed all 3 brothers leading a blindfolded man toward their cabin at dusk. They walked in a triangle around him, she recalled, each holding a rope attached to the man's wrists. They were speaking together in some language I never heard before, like singing almost, but with no melody to it. When asked why she hadn't reported this incident earlier, she replied, "Because the next morning I saw that same man leaving their property, smiling and carrying his bag. At least, he looked the same. But something in how he moved made me wonder if it was really him inside his skin." As investigators examined records more closely, evidence emerged suggesting the Blackwood brothers had established similar homesteads in at least 3 other states prior to arriving in Missouri. Property records discovered in Tennessee, Kentucky, and Arkansas revealed a pattern: purchase of isolated land, construction of unusual dwellings, unexplained disappearances in the vicinity, and the brothers' sudden departure coinciding with increased local suspicion. A Kentucky sheriff's report from 1888, located through correspondence in 1892, described investigating an abandoned property matching the Blackwood pattern after reports of strange lights and sounds. The cabin had been burned to the ground, the report noted, with such thoroughness that suggests deliberate destruction of evidence. What couldn't be destroyed was buried, though spring rains have a way of uncovering what's meant to stay hidden. The Kentucky investigation had been prompted by the disappearance of a geology professor and 2 students from a nearby college, last seen collecting mineral samples near the brothers' property. Excavation of the burned site revealed a partially collapsed tunnel, leading to an underground chamber similar to the one discovered in Missouri. Inside were found fragments of journals, partially burned but containing pages of the same cipher later discovered at Crow's Nest Hollow. More telling was the discovery of carved stone tablets bearing symbols identical to those in the Missouri cabin. In Arkansas, the pattern repeated with a homestead purchased under the name Blackwell in 1889. Within 6 months of their arrival, 3 travelers and a local hunter vanished. When authorities began investigating, the brothers abandoned the property overnight, leaving behind evidence that included specialized tools and a wall covered with anatomical drawings showing a human nervous system modified in ways that, according to a medical examiner, could not possibly function in nature yet were rendered with disturbing anatomical precision. Most significant was the Tennessee property, purchased in 1886, where local legends had already arisen about Duck, the 3 brothers who spoke with one voice. County records indicated that following a spate of disappearances, an improvised citizens' committee had surrounded the property one night in 1887 with the intention of demanding answers. They found the cabin empty, though the cooking fire still burned and food remained on the table, an eerie precursor to the scene later discovered in Missouri. In October 1967, historian Margaret Wells discovered the key to deciphering the journals found in the hidden chamber. The contents, published in her 1970 monograph Darkness in the Hollow, revealed the disturbing truth behind the Blackwood brothers' activities. The eldest brother, Samuel, had recorded their experiments in precise, dispassionate language. According to his writings, the brothers believed they had discovered a means to extend life by harvesting and consuming specific organs from living subjects. The journal described their methodology, their failures, and what they considered successes, moments when they claimed to have absorbed the essence of their victims. Most disturbing were entries suggesting the brothers had begun experiencing disturbing side effects, shared dreams, auditory hallucinations, and the unsettling sense that they were being observed by entities they referred to only as the Watchers in the Woods. The journals revealed that the brothers' experiments began after discovering what Samuel described as An ancient text, bound in material I cannot identify, in a cave system in eastern Tennessee. This text, written in a language they initially could not read, contained diagrams of human anatomy, unlike any modern medical illustration, focusing on systems or connections not recognized by conventional medicine. Samuel wrote of spending months deciphering the text, becoming convinced it detailed a process whereby multiple consciousnesses could be merged into a single shared mind of greater power and longevity. The brothers' early experiments involved small animals, progressing to larger mammals before eventually targeting human subjects. Samuel's entries meticulously documented their harvesting procedures, focusing on neural tissue, certain glands, and organs they believed contained the seat of consciousness. These were prepared according to specific recipes found in the ancient text, then consumed in ritualistic ceremonies performed at precise lunar phases. By November 1890, Samuel reported that the brothers had begun experiencing moments of perfect synchronicity during which they shared thoughts without speaking and moved in perfect coordination. These experiences were initially celebrated as proof of their success, but later entries grew increasingly paranoid, describing sensations of other presences, attempting to enter their shared consciousness during these states. Entities that Samuel believed were attracted by their activities and sought to claim the power they were accumulating. The final decipherable entry, dated the 15th of March 1891, contained a single disturbing line. "They are no longer content to watch. They approach through the thinning veil, wearing familiar faces taken from our memories." The last dated entry in Samuel Blackwood's journal was the 27th of March 1891, approximately 3 weeks before William Hargrove discovered the abandoned cabin. Wells' translation reads, "The process accelerates. Last night, Jeremiah spoke with Richard Fletcher's voice, though Fletcher has been in the ground these 2 months. Thaddeus no longer sleeps, but stands at the window from dusk till dawn, whispering about shapes moving between the trees. I have begun to see them too, not with my eyes, but with something else that has awakened inside me. We have opened a door that cannot be closed. The watchers are coming closer." The entry concludes with a cryptic statement. "What we sought to consume is now consuming us. The boundary between hunter and prey dissolves. We must complete the final ritual before the hollow claims us entirely." Earlier entries from March revealed the brothers' deteriorating condition. On March 10, Samuel wrote, "Our reflections have begun to move independently of us. This morning, as we stood before the mirror, I raised my right hand while my reflection raised its left. Thaddeus saw it too, but Jeremiah claimed his reflection had no face at all, just a darkness that seemed to absorb the surrounding light." By March 15, Samuel reported that the brothers had begun experiencing periods where one would lose control of his body entirely, becoming a passive observer while something else moves within our skin. These episodes grew longer and more frequent as the month progressed. The penultimate entry, dated March 25, described a ritual the brothers planned to perform at the stone circle in the woods. The text promises that the final merging will resolve these intrusions by completing our transformation into a single consciousness across 3 bodies, too powerful for outside entities to penetrate. We have prepared the circle with the prescribed materials. The necessary components extracted from our last subjects have been prepared according to the ancient formulas. The alignment comes tomorrow night. We must not fail. The very final page of the journal, which Wells believed was written on April 16, contained only a hastily scrawled message in a hand noticeably different from Samuel's careful script. "They came through, not from outside but from within us. What we consumed remembered its own name. The door opens both ways. 3 become 1. 1 becomes many. The hollow hungers still." In 1975, Dr. Eleanor Mitchell, a forensic psychiatrist from Washington University, published an analysis of the Blackwood case. She proposed that the brothers suffered from a rare shared psychosis, exacerbated by isolation and possibly triggered by childhood trauma suggested in fragments of the journals referencing their early lives. The elaborate delusions, complete with supernatural elements and ritualistic behaviors, she wrote, created a self-reinforcing reality for the brothers. Their beliefs about extending life through consumption of victims likely served as justification for darker urges and impulses. The apparent disappearance of the brothers themselves may represent either an escape when they feared discovery or, more disturbingly, the logical conclusion of their delusion, a final ritual they believed would transform them completely. Dr. Mitchell's analysis identified several factors contributing to the brothers' psychological deterioration. Their childhood, according to journal fragments, featured an abusive father who subjected them to extended periods of sensory deprivation as punishment, possibly establishing neural patterns conducive to dissociative states. Their isolation in remote settings reinforced their shared belief system without external reality checks, creating what Mitchell termed a folie à trois, where each brother validated and intensified the other's delusions. Most significant in Mitchell's assessment was the role of ritualistic cannibalism in their psychological decline. The consumption of human neural tissue creates profound psychological effects beyond the moral taboo, she wrote. Certain proteins in brain matter, when improperly prepared, can cause hallucinations, paranoia, and neurological deterioration, similar to what the brothers described in their final entries. Mitchell theorized that their physical symptoms likely resulted from a prion disease similar to Kuru, contracted through their cannibalistic practices, causing progressive neurological damage that would have manifested as tremors, coordination problems, and eventually severe cognitive impairment. This physical deterioration would have seemed to confirm their beliefs about transformation, creating a devastating feedback loop. In their deteriorating mental state, Mitchell concluded, the boundary between internal thought and external reality would have dissolved. Their final ritual, whatever form it took, likely involved violence that either led to their deaths or to a state of profound dissociation where they wandered into the wilderness, unable to maintain contact with consensus reality. The mystery of the Blackwood brothers cast a long shadow over Shannon County. For decades after their disappearance, locals avoided Crow's Nest Hollow. The cabin itself was eventually dismantled by order of the county commissioner in 1895, though several workers reportedly abandoned the task after experiencing unexplained phenomena, including sudden temperature drops, disembodied whispers, and glimpses of figures moving at the forest's edge. Interviews conducted by folklorist Daniel Harper in the 1,970 seconds revealed that the story had evolved into a powerful regional legend. Multiple residents described childhood warnings to avoid the hollow after dark, while others recounted stories of hunters who ventured too near the old homestead site and returned changed, withdrawn, prone to staring at nothing, speaking of eyes watching from between the trees. The Blackwood case influenced local culture in subtle but pervasive ways. Churches in Shannon County experienced increased attendance for nearly a decade following the incident, with sermons frequently addressing themes of evil and temptation. County records show 3 separate attempts to establish homesteads in Crow's Nest Hollow between 1,900 and 1,920, all abandoned within months despite the quality of the land. Local merchant ledgers revealed declining sales of certain meat products, particularly organ meats, which had previously been common staples in rural Ozark diets. School children developed rhyming games referencing the 3 brothers who walk as one, complete with ritualized movements performed in groups of 3. The county itself suffered economic consequences, as travelers avoided routes passing near the hollow, forcing merchants to establish alternative supply lines at considerable expense. The most profound impact manifested in the creation of new folk practices specific to the region. Harper documented protective rituals that emerged in communities surrounding the hollow, arranging stones in specific patterns at property boundaries, hanging mirrors facing outward from windows to reflect back whatever looks in, avoiding speaking in groups of 3 after sunset. Most notable was the persistent belief that the brothers hadn't truly vanished but had somehow merged with the hollow itself. Multiple accounts referenced encounters with a single entity that appeared as 3 identical men moving in perfect synchrony, reportedly seen at crossroads during twilight hours or at the edge of forest clearings during the full moon. In 1982, Anthropologist Dr. James Matthews led a university-sponsored archaeological survey of the former Blackwood property. His team uncovered foundations of the cabin and outbuildings, confirming the unusual construction described in historical accounts. Excavation of the collapsed root cellar yielded additional evidence, including human bone fragments with unusual tool marks consistent with surgical precision rather than typical butchery. Most significant was the discovery of a sealed mason jar containing a document written on parchment in the same cipher used in the journals. When translated, it appeared to be instructions for a ritual the brothers believed would allow them to transcend the limitations of singular form and merge with what waits in the spaces between trees. Matthew's excavation revealed other disturbing artifacts: 3 identical silver rings, each engraved with the same symbol found throughout the property. Glass vials containing residue that chemical analysis identified as a compound of human neural tissue, specific fungi found in the region, and an unknown organic substance that defied conventional classification. Soil samples from the area surrounding the stone circle in the woods showed abnormal properties, including unusual magnetic readings and chemical compositions inconsistent with the surrounding terrain. Most puzzling were the tree growth patterns near the ritual site, which exhibited accelerated growth in a perfect circle with stunted, twisted formations, unlike healthy specimens of the same species nearby. The survey took an unsettling turn when 3 team members reported experiencing identical dreams on consecutive nights, each describing walking through the woods with 2 others who shared my face. 2 research assistants developed unexplained symptoms, including temporal lobe disturbances and brief dissociative episodes during which they spoke in unison with each other. The university abruptly terminated the excavation after one researcher wandered from camp during the night and was found the following morning standing motionless at the stone circle, unresponsive to questions and unable to account for his actions. Matthew's official report, considerably more reserved than his private field notes obtained years later, concluded that the site showed evidence of ritualistic activities consistent with certain obscure occult practices originating in pre-Christian Europe, combined with elements unique to this case that suggest the development of an entirely original belief system. The Blackwood case returned to public attention in 2018 when 3 hikers disappeared in the vicinity of Crow's Nest Hollow. The intensive search operation found no trace of the missing persons, but led to a disturbing discovery. Carved into several trees around the perimeter of the former Blackwood property were symbols identical to those documented in the 1891 investigation and the decoded journals. More troubling were reports from search team members who described experiencing disorientation, lost time, and auditory hallucinations while in the hollow. According to the final report filed by Shannon County Sheriff Rebecca Harmon, 4 team members requested psychiatric evaluation after claiming to have seen 3 figures watching from the tree line at dusk, moving in perfect unison, as if sharing a single mind. The missing hikers, graduate students from the University of Missouri's anthropology department, had ventured into the region specifically to research the Blackwood legend for a documentary project. Their abandoned campsite, discovered 3 days after they were reported overdue, contained intact equipment including cameras and supplies, suggesting they had not planned to leave. Review of their recovered video footage showed normal documentation of their journey until the final recording, which captured only a strange audio anomaly described by sound technicians as 3 voices speaking in perfect synchronization, though saying different words simultaneously. The search operation, involving over 50 personnel from multiple agencies, experienced unusual technical difficulties throughout the 2-week effort. Radio communications failed intermittently despite functional equipment. GPS devices showed impossible coordinates that placed teams miles from their actual locations, and multiple compasses exhibited simultaneous malfunctions, with needles rotating in continuous circles. Most disturbing was the experience reported by Deputy Mark Collins, who became separated from his search team for approximately 3 hours. Upon rejoining the group, Collins claimed to have encountered 3 identical men standing in a triangle formation around a stone marker. "They spoke to me with one voice," his statement read, "but said they were waiting for others to join them. When I asked who they were waiting for, they smiled with the same expression and said only that they had been 3, but soon would be 6. Following this incident, Sheriff Harmon suspended the search operation in the hollow itself, citing safety concerns. The hikers were never found, despite being added to national missing persons databases and extensive media coverage. Today, Crow's Nest Hollow remains largely avoided by locals. The land has never been successfully settled since the Blackwood brothers' disappearance. Attempts to establish homesteads or hunting cabins in the vicinity have invariably been abandoned, the would-be residents citing reasons ranging from bad feelings to more explicit descriptions of paranormal experiences. The ultimate fate of the Blackwood brothers remains unknown. No confirmed trace of them has ever been found beyond the hollow they once inhabited. Yet, periodic reports emerge from the region. Unusual lights seen deep in the woods, hikers encountering men in outdated clothing who vanish when approached, strange sounds echoing through the hollow on still nights. Perhaps most unsettling is the consistency in these modern encounters. Witnesses often describe the same 3 figures, always at a distance, always watching, always moving with an unnatural synchronicity. The brothers who came to Crow's Nest Hollow seeking to transcend human limitations through unspeakable acts may have achieved a different kind of immortality than they intended, preserved not in flesh, but in the collective fear and fascination their story continues to evoke. For the historian, the Blackwood case offers a disturbing glimpse into the darkest potential of human nature. For the psychologist, it presents a compelling study in shared delusion and isolation-induced psychosis. But for those familiar with the Hollow and its history, it serves as a warning that some boundaries were never meant to be crossed, some hungers never meant to be fed, and some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. The Missouri Department of Conservation now manages the land containing Crow's Nest Hollow as part of a wildlife preserve. Though internal documents obtained through Freedom of Information, requests show that rangers rarely patrol the area and scientific surveys are consistently scheduled elsewhere. State tourism officials omit the hollow from maps and promotional materials despite growing interest in dark tourism throughout the Ozarks. Most telling is the response of longtime residents when asked about the Blackwood brothers. They tend to change the subject or offer warnings rather than information. As one elderly woman from Eminence told a researcher in 2020, "Some stories ain't meant for telling, especially after the sun goes down. Some names call more than memories when spoken aloud." The Blackwood case remains officially classified as an unsolved disappearance in Shannon County records. Yet perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this enduring mystery isn't what happened to the 3 brothers who vanished in 1890, but the possibility that they never truly left, that something wearing their forms still moves through the shadowed hollow, watching and waiting for those curious enough or unfortunate enough to venture into their domain, still seeking others to complete the transformation they began over a century ago.